Forget everything you think you know about money, because this is the tale of how Bitcoin is sweeping across the globe, leveling the playing field and turning underdog nations into economic powerhouses. Let's mine deep. In regions grappling with economic disparities, civil unrest, and government collapses, Bitcoin emerges as a beacon of hope, fostering trust, enhancing financial accessibility, and stimulating growth. These nations, often plagued with unstable currencies, political repression, and limited access to banking, are starting to take advantage of Bitcoin. Here's why. Financial inclusion. Traditional banking systems often overlook large portions of the population in developing nations. Many people in these regions are unbanked, meaning they don't have access to basic financial services. In parts of sub-Saharan Africa, a vast majority of the population does not have access to traditional banking. However, mobile phone usage is widespread, making it a potential avenue for Bitcoin-based financial services. Remittances. Many developing nations rely heavily on remittances from family members working abroad. Traditional remittance services can be costly and slow, not to mention centralized and capable of blacklisting any user on a whim. Sending money from Europe to sub-Saharan Africa using traditional methods can cost upwards of 7% in fees. In contrast, using Bitcoin and the Lightning Network, it's virtually instant and nearly free. Protection against hyperinflation. Most poor countries suffer from hyperinflation, causing their national currencies to lose value rapidly.
Venezuela, of course, a country where prices double every few weeks and a monthly salary isn't enough to buy meat for one family meal. That's why the government has knocked those 5 zeros off the refurbished bolivar in a desperate attempt to control hyperinflation.
Venezuela experienced extreme hyperinflation, leading its currency, the bolivar, to become nearly worthless. Many Venezuelans turn to Bitcoin to preserve their wealth and make everyday transactions. Capital controls and financial freedom. In some nations, governments impose strict capital controls, limiting the amount of money that citizens can send or receive from abroad. In 2015, the Chinese government imposed strict capital controls to prevent capital flight. This led to a surge in Bitcoin, used by Chinese investors to move money out of the country. Bitcoin offers people in inflation-ravaged countries an alternative financial system where their labor and savings can be preserved from the eroding effects of hyperinflation. You see, approximately half of the world's population, around 4 billion people, live under authoritarian regimes, often facing political repression, financial surveillance, and often high inflation. Statistics show that 15 of the top 20 countries in terms of digital currency ownership are developing nations. The center of Bitcoin innovation is shifting to places like Lagos or Buenos Aires rather than San Francisco, because its role is more essential to the success of solving the real issues with these countries. For instance, in Argentina, where the local currency is unstable, people have traditionally relied on the US dollar as a store of value. However, government restrictions on accessing USD have made Bitcoin an attractive alternative.
An economic crisis worsening by the day. Argentina becoming unaffordable for essentially its whole population, suffering 104% annual inflation.
And last year, 60% of Argentinians said they believe that Bitcoin can retain the value better than the Argentinian peso. Nigeria, Africa's most populous country that is facing political repression and inflation, has many citizens that have turned to cryptocurrencies. While the Nigerian government tried to ban them in early 2021, they soon realized the futility of such an action, given its widespread adoption and decentralized nature, was not going to work. Since Wi-Fi was a problem in these places, a South African open source developer created Machankura, a unique service that lets people access Bitcoin via SMS without needing a direct internet connection. Given that many Africans have basic mobile phones and limited internet access, this system was built to use text messages for Lightning transactions. Even during wars, you see over in Ukraine, during the Russian invasion, the government set up official crypto wallets to accept donations, raising over 120 million euros to support its troops and procure military supplies. And many Ukrainians use Bitcoin to protect their savings, transferring money safely during the war, and even transactioning it for daily needs. So why should you care? Because while the government can fail you, Bitcoin can't. Although it may be a luxury or speculative tool for some, it serves as a lifeline for many in developing countries. It offers an escape from political and economic turmoil, providing a hedge against monetary debasement and repression. In regimes where traditional systems malfunction, Bitcoin remains a steadfast alternative. So what are you waiting for? Don't miss Ricardo Salinas Backstage. So how do you think Bitcoin can affect an economy like Mexico or Latin America in the future?
Well, I think that all over the world, not just in Mexico or Latin America, what we're seeing is this increasing inflation tax, which means that people's savings are being taken from them without their permission, without their knowledge. And it's very sad, especially for people who depend on this for their retirement. So Bitcoin is a way to protect against that because it cannot be debased. So the importance of Bitcoin is that it's tax resistant and many other things. But it very specifically applies to hyperinflationary economies, of which we have several in Latin America.
And what would need to happen in Mexico for mass adoption for Bitcoin? Or what do the gobernícolas have to do to, push Bitcoin as a tool for freedom?
Yeah, well, the thing is, the first thing that needs to happen is people need to realize that they're being scammed, that they're being robbed by these crooks in the government. That's what they are. They're fraudsters. They commit fraud. And they stand there and say, "Hi, we're doing monetary policy," and they're just stealing people blind. So first thing that needs to happen is people need to understand how this works so they can then defend against that, right? But these gobernícolas, these government cavemen, as I call them, they're not dumb, they're not stupid, and they're not going to give away this power they have to confiscate people's wealth. So you got to take it from them.
A lot of people think because you're taxing the government, you're doing good for the country, but in reality, you're just feeding into their clown pockets.
Well, that's the whole thing about, collectivist philosophy is to take from some to supposedly give to others. And I have a good Spanish phrase, robar para repartirse. To steal from some to supposedly redistributed amongst some other guys, which might not be the most needy, it might not be the most poor, they might just be their friends and the people who work with them or themselves. So they distribute, they're just thieves.
Gobernícolas, a word that you patent.
Gobernícolas are thieves, they live off theft. This is something that we are here for the Atlas Society meeting, and it's very relevant because, as you know, it's named after Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand. And Rand was so on the dot by pointing out that looters depend for their existence on people allowing themselves to be looted. So first thing we need to do is just realize that we're being robbed and then do things to stop it.
Do you think third world countries would benefit more from Bitcoin than first world countries?
We have seen more hyperinflation in third world countries like Zimbabwe, in Argentina, in Venezuela, in Cuba. But, Germany had hyperinflation in the Weimar Republic. And if you look at the devaluation of the British pound over the past 100 years, it's really pathetic. Even the good old US dollar is worth a really tiny fraction of what it was worth 100 years ago. So it depends on the horizon, But I think everybody would benefit from understanding that the debasement of currency is a very useful trick in the fraudsters' trick book to avoid raising taxes or debt.
Speaking of that, how has Bitcoin changed your life?
You know, it gives me a new perspective of how we can aspire to keep our savings in a safe place, which means out of the claws of the looters. It took me a while to figure that out. But I think Michael Saylor's done a fantastic job of explaining all of this, and he does it much better than I. But really, it's an educational question. People need to find out why it's so important to keep a good part of your wealth in Bitcoins.
Is there a second best?
No, there's a portfolio. There's a mix of things. You know, for example, I have companies, and companies are always a great asset because they're productive assets, and they make profits year on year by serving people, of course. If not, we wouldn't make any profits. But if you can't have a company, and most people can't, and then what are your options for saving money? Well, you can invest in stocks, which tend to be overvalued and, you know, pushed in a certain way for some people to benefit. Or, God forbid, you could buy bonds, which would be the dumbest thing in the world. Don't do that. Or you can buy some assets like gold or Bitcoin. And I think that's the part where Bitcoin will shine. If you have an extra allocation for the hard assets and take it in the form of Bitcoin, I think it's a very useful thing, yeah.
Now that the Bitcoin ETF is coming along, how do you think that will affect Bitcoin?
Obviously, an ETF is a new source of demand. It makes it easier for people to invest in Bitcoin. So that's great. It's what's needed, but precisely because it's great and what's needed, it's precisely because of that reason that the crooks in power don't allow it to proceed, you know. And Mr. Gensler there knows exactly what we're talking about. He has very good reasons not to allow, as well as the people in the Treasury and the Fed. They all know perfectly well. It's not about protecting investors. It's about protecting their way of financing government spending without raising taxes.
Especially what Sam Bankman-Fried did. So if you were to say a message to him that he's in trial right now, what would you say to SBF?
I don't have an opinion. I think he was a young guy that got carried away. And it's too bad for him. So I guess he'll have to pay for his sins. I don't know.
Here's a quick news recap of the week. Janet Yellen, the U.S. Secretary of Treasury, announced that the United States can afford to support 2 wars. She said America can certainly afford to stand with Israel and support Israel's military needs. She added that we also can and must support Ukraine in its struggle against Russia. Let's not forget that there are theories of the Biden administration funding the war, since in September, Biden transferred $6 billion USD in exchange for freeing 5 Americans who were detained in Iran.
On the anniversary of 9/11, the Biden White House just struck a deal with Iran to do a prisoner swap and release $6 billion in frozen Iranian funds.
And in the war with Ukraine, they have sent more than $75 billion.
The American people are determined to see to it that you do all we can to ensure the world stands with you.
On October 19th, a couple of days after the infamous tweet about ETF approvals, BlackRock filed an updated ETF application after the SEC feedback.
Well, I can't talk about Bitcoin because we have a filing with the SEC, so I'm prohibited. I can talk about crypto in general.
And Grayscale filed a new application for its Grayscale Bitcoin Trust. The application is laying the groundwork for the company's Grayscale Bitcoin Trust digital currency investment product to operate as an ETF listed on the New York Stock Exchange. And if you're not living under a rock, you probably saw, heard, or even read about the false Bitcoin ETF approval by Cointelegraph. Within 10 minutes of the Post publication, the Bitcoin price spiked to rise above the $29,000 level, surging more than 8%. Simultaneously, $105 million in Bitcoin positions were liquidated, including $73 million in shorts and $32 million in longs. So when the Bitcoin Spot ETF gets approved, hold on tight because Bitcoin will be going for a ride. Like Fidelity said on their new guide as to why Bitcoin is different from any other digital asset, remember, Bitcoin is the most secure, decentralized, sound digital money there is. And over in Manhattan, where the Sam Bankman-Fried trial is taking place, the judge lost his patience with the lawyers. saying some of their witnesses were a waste of time and a joke. As of now, the court has heard from a lot of people, like the FTX co-founder Gary Wang, FTX former head of engineering Nishad Singh, and the star witness, his ex, Caroline Ellison, former Alameda CEO.
The trial of Sam Bankman-Fried getting even more interesting today as his ex-girlfriend continues to testify, and we're getting some salacious details from Caroline Ellison's testimony and her time running Bankman-Fried's hedge fund.
His ex said that SBF instructed her to commit those crimes and take around $14 billion from the clients and the customers of FTX. And let's just say that Alameda inflated the price of the Sam coin, the FTT token, to help secure loans. That's not all. During an FBI agent's testimony, it came out that in September of 2022, Sam had meetings with high-profile figures like ex-President Bill Clinton, New York Governor Kathy Hochul, and New York City Mayor Eric Adams. But that's not the only lawsuit going around. Gemini Trust Co. and Barry Silbert's digital currency group were sued by New York's top law enforcement officer for allegedly defrauding customers of $1.1 billion.
New York Attorney General Letitia James just sued both Genesis, its parent company digital currency group, and Gemini. State prosecutors claim DCG and Gemini defrauded more than 230,000 investors out of $1.1 billion.
Meanwhile, Musk is planning to start a subscription plan on X, charging users in New Zealand and Philippines $1 a year. Would this be the reason that people migrate over to Nostr? Anyway, remember, keep stacking that Bitcoin stack. Even Tesla's doing it, hodling their $312 million worth of Bitcoin during their third quarter.